Chapter 23. The tactical nuclear weapon struck the red alien hive dead on. Kozlowski watched the event inside the lander on the screen from the Rutsia's perspective. These tactical strikes had an extremely limited radius of effect, with minimal fallout and radiation. But nonetheless, they had carefully ascertained the weather conditions beforehand. Everything had been perfect for the strike. The execution had been precise and professional. "Good shooting," she told Hastings. Then she went outside where the troops were waiting for her. They'd heard the news on their radios and were cheering. "Just the start, people," she said as she strode into their midst. "The uphill road is ahead." She'd already noticed that the ranks of the battling aliens had thinned out somewhat. "What's going on out there?" "Just seconds after the detonation, the Reds just kind of stopped whatever they were doing and started spasming. Lots got killed, I think, and lots more are starting to take off," reported Mahone. "Whatever psychic link they had with their Queen Mother must have been broken when the bitch got wasted," said Henriksen, nodding. Kozlowski visualized that moment of intense destruction, the impact as that multi-megaton nuke tore through the chambers of the Reds, decimating all inside, shrieking, caroming nuclear wind. Had Queenie gotten off one final scream of agony, one bitter, nasty farewell to her evil crew? Kozlowski hoped so. She hoped that that bitch knew who'd been responsible. She was only sorry the thing didn't have a little picture of her to take down to bug hell with her. Kozlowski turned to where Grant stood, looking uncomfortable and anxious in his suit. Doubtless, he was regretting his volunteering for the move into the hive. He'd be okay, though. He had the stuff. "There it is," said Henriksen, putting down the pair of binoculars and pointing. "You don't need glasses to see that, baby." Sure enough, off to the east, she could see the telltale mushroom cloud rising up past the horizon of this flat, bleak landscape. Black and poisonous. "They're taking off in droves," someone shouted. Kozlowski swiveled. Sure enough, the Reds seemed totally disinterested in the conflict now. They were taking off in waves, racing away back towards their blasted hive. Why? Instinct? Whatever the reason, it wouldn't do them much good. Still, Kozlowski was pleased. They wouldn't be hanging around here. The blacks hung back for a moment, perplexed. Then, as though the thunderbolt of realization had hit them, they started after the enemy who had attempted to destroy them. Totally ignoring the interlopers behind the shielded vessel from another planet. "Yes," said Kozlowski, stamping the ground with unalloyed glee. "Just as planned." "It worked," she said. "The Reds are retreating to the other hive. This one should be clear in a few minutes." Grant was fidgeting. He clearly wanted this all to be over. "Then let's get moving. Who's going in?" "Everyone but the technical crew," said Kozlowski. "And Ellis." "Makes sense," said Grant. "He's taking Jastrow's death pretty hard." "Yeah," said Mahone. "They grew up together, joined the Corps together, and fought for years in the same unit." "He's a good Marine," said Kozlowski. "He'll be okay in a few days, but I'd rather not have him in close combat right now. Besides, someone has to man the guns, She walked over to the bank of guns poking out the side of the lander. "How are you doing up there, Private?" "All set, Colonel." Luckily, they trained all the troops to use these things. "Right, I'm sure you'll do just fine." She turned back and walked over towards Grant. "How about you? You sure you want to do this?" "No, but I'm going to." "Good. It'll be good to have you along." "All right then. Helmets on." She fitted her own above her suit, clicked in the radio, waited for the rest of the troops to check in. When they did, when it was all finished, she chinned her radio again. "Okay, O'Connor." The troops lifted their guns, released the safeties. "Drop the southern border." They moved out. There were still a few red aliens lingering about, and these charged in when they got a whiff of the intruders. But this was the kind of operation that the Marines had expected, that they had trained for. The blasts of their rifles easily dealt with the charging aliens. It was like a shooting gallery. Meanwhile, Ellis and O'Connor were doing damned fine work with the PEHs. They spiked a few home to either side of the hive's opening, and moments later the Marines had a nice tunnel of force field to make their way through, cleaning up the couple of Xenos left over, and not having to worry about the ones who'd been excluded from the party. Kozlowski turned to see how Grant was doing. She'd put him in the back to guard the rear so he wouldn't shoot any of the troops. He was doing a damned good job of blasting apart the fallen aliens, making sure they stayed down. When they reached the opening of the hive, Kozlowski put a hand up, halting the party. "What's the reading say, O'Connor?" she asked through the radio. "Sensors show they're on the run. No parties coming back." "Good news." She turned to the group. "I don't know how long we've got in there before the three bears come home, but I do know we're going to go in there and get us some porridge." Laughter. Cheers. "However, let's be quick about it, okay? No sightseeing, no rubbernecking. We picked up enough DNA from the dead Reds already, so we don't have to pack anything on ice. Moreover, we don't have to take them back alive. Now, as we discussed before, what we're going to be up against in there are some pretty nasty bugs. Bigger and smarter. Take this into account." "Kozlowski." She turned and found herself helmet to red face with Grant. He'd undone his top and was holding it at his side, getting himself a breath of fresh air. "Well, Colonel." His eyes were gleaming with excitement. He looked like a Boy Scout who just fired his first BB gun. "Were my combat skills satisfactory?" Kozlowski granted him a patronizing scowl. "Pat yourself on the back later, Grant, and put that damn helmet back on." She got back on the radio. "O'Connor, send up the cargo drone." That was what they were going to be using to carry the royal jelly back up with. "When it gets up here, we'll drop the southern border and head out. We all ready?" She surveyed the covered faces, knowing already that they were about as ready as they were ever going to be. "This is the last radio contact till we get back out," said Kozlowski. "Open her up, O'Connor. Over and out. The skein of force frizzled off. Perfect. O'Connor was getting really good in his manipulations. The tunnel of the force field that led from the rounded entrance of the hive back to the bubble around the razzia was still intact. There weren't too many of the blacks left out there, but they couldn't get in. Unless, of course, there were other entrances. Likely, but the things didn't seem particularly interested. They seemed more interested in the cargo drone that had crawled up the slight incline. It was an automatically controlled vehicle with 8 thick wheels. Omni-terrain. One of the Marines took over the controls when it reached them. They started down. The tunnels were recognizably of alien origin. Kozlowski had seen plenty of hive tunnels. That was for certain. Nonetheless, these were a little larger than usual, with a different consistency of building material. "I've never seen an alien nest so empty before," said one of the soldiers. "I have," said Kozlowski grimly. "And it was a trap." The nest on Hollywood and Vine. It was flashing back on her. The walls, like inside a tumorous colon. The prickly fear, the sick in the stomach. Having people with her she respected, cared for, smack dab in the vat of trouble and fear, along with someone special, for whom she feared the most. She remembered her feelings for Michaels. It welled up inside of her, and she had to push it back down, along with her fear. This time would be different, she told herself. She shut out the memory and went into her automatic, competent mode. Nonetheless, she could feel the memories crowding in on her. About 40 meters down, it became apparent that things were different in other ways as well. There was a convergence of tunnels. 3 separate ways to go. "Okay, Dr. Begali, get your butt up here and that machine up front." Dr. Begali shuttled forward. In his hand, he held a device with a pair of green sensor extensions. A pheromone detector. Begali tapped a few buttons and pointed the device in each of the directions in turn, scrutinizing the results carefully. "Well, Doctor," said Kozlowski, "which way to the buried treasure?" The helmeted head bobbed eagerly. "Well, the pheromone readings seem to jibe with what I expected." He pointed to the left. "Let's try that way." They started down the corridor. "This is why we need Begali," she told Grant. "The tunnels of this hive are much more maze-like than any I've encountered on Earth. Without him, it might take a long time to find the Queen Mother." Grant shook his head. "If you say so, Colonel, but I'm still keeping my eye on him." "That's it, Grant. I've found the perfect job for you. Begali Watch. Sounds wonderfully exotic," she said. "Sure, that's what I'll do." Grant's helmet turreted back and forth. "Where is the little creep anyway?" "You're not doing your job. But don't worry, there's a curve just up ahead. He went around that. We've just lost sight." "Colonel," said Private Mahone, "the motion detectors show significant and sudden activity up ahead." "Begali!" Kozlowski yelled. "Get your ass back here!" Just then, the suited Dr. Bigali returned around the bend, where he disappeared. Kozlowski could hear him screaming, without the benefit of the radio.